We are talking Night's End. This was originally made under the title Restless, however. And this one was directed by Jennifer Reeder and stars Geno Walker as Ken. Although you do have a recognisable name here in Michael Shannon, who plays a small supporting role. A low-budget 2022 movie about a guy, Ken, who is an agoraphobic, who essentially is a shut-in. He has a fear of kind of going outside, being in open spaces, and thus his life is somewhat mundane, you might say. Now, he appears to be, you know, somewhat of a repetitive life, kind of eating the same things, not really kind of having much in regards to any type of social life. He's divorced. His ex-wife is kind of remarried to Michael Shannon's character. He appears to not really have much to do with his children. He's trying to find a job. He's kind of at a bit of a lost end here, and he's very kind of feeling the strain of being somewhat of a failure in his own mind. So he's moved to this new apartment. We don't know how he's got there, being, you know, obviously agoraphobic and stuff, but never mind. And this apartment appears to be haunted, and you know, he's doing one of these YouTube videos. One of his schemes to try and kind of make some money is to be a kind of a YouTuber, and he's doing one of these videos, and something happens kind of behind him that he's initially unaware of, and it leads him down this rabbit hole of maybe looking into the potential supernatural sort of side of things and what's kind of going on, and where this will lead may be a dark place indeed. Now, what will happen? You have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in Night's End. So I think this has an interesting kind of setup already. We have a guy who's agoraphobic, so he has a fear of going outside, but he's living in an apartment which appears to be haunted, and he's obviously pretty scared of that. So you have fear of going outside versus fear of staying inside with this potentially kind of malevolent entity. So what's he going to do? What is a guy to do? And I think that's quite the conundrum, and I think that would have made for an interesting, a mental challenge for someone to try and overcome one of these things at least. The movie never really capitalises on that, however, but I think the idea is there, certainly I think in the beginning of the movie. I have to say as well, I think as Ken as a main character, is quite an interesting one, because he's certainly a flawed character. He seems to be somewhat kind of lazy in regards to, you know, having a relationship with his children, things like this. He seems to be, you know, kind of putting off kind of speaking to them and things like this. So he has certainly isn't a particularly altruistic character. He certainly has some character flaws, but he also elicits sympathy from the audience, I think, because he's watching his wife, for example, have this new husband in Michael Shannon's character. He's obviously has this kind of debilitating condition where he kind of can't go outside, which is obviously somewhat limiting at the very least. Doesn't have a job, he's struggling. So he has these kind of like a range of kind of emotive kind of situations. So it makes it for an interesting character, and I think the performance as well was actually kind of quite good. I quite enjoyed the actor's performance here to make this kind of character multi-dimensional and kind of certainly an interesting character study at the very least. One small thing that I did enjoy was Ken's relationship with Michael Shannon's character, who is the new husband of his ex-wife. Now, normally in these kind of like exes, new boyfriend versus old boyfriend type thing, it's an antagonistic relationship. But I actually quite like the fact that these two actually seem to somewhat kind of get along for the most part, or at least make kind of the best of it, and are certainly not kind of hostile towards each other. And I think that's quite a mature attitude to have in these kind of situations. I think it's very easy to have these kind of inflated drama situations where you know, the new husband is arguing with the old husband, for example, and you see that all the time in movies. And you know, sometimes that happens, but sometimes this happens where, you know, people split up, and you can have these kind of like, at least somewhat of a mutual respect. And as the ex-husband, you know, you still want maybe the best for your family and stuff. So I actually could have quite liked that idea here. Now the movie is pretty much all shot inside, and as such, it has a kind of artificial lighting feel. But at the same time, I do think there is some interesting looks, because considering this is clearly a low budget movie, done with kind of some kind of atmospheric kind of lighting and, you know, sort of cinematography and things like this to kind of give this movie a feel of kind of claustrophobia, which goes hand in hand with our character's agoraphobia, to really make you feel like the walls are closing in, and you know, we have this presence there, and we kind of feel it subtly at first, but it kind of ever growing to kind of more dangerous kind of situations and things like that. I also quite like the way Ken and his friend, I think it's Terry, who are kind of, you know, communicating over Zoom, just haphazardly kind of like try things in a paranormal fashion. You know, yeah, we'll do this spirit job, and I'll just put a load of old markings on it. I don't know what they mean. And you obviously, you know, in the movie world, you know these things are going to kind of go wrong. But I like the way that they're clearly not experts. They're clearly just kind of like muddle their way through without really knowing what they're doing. And it was just quite fun having a much more of a layman's kind of doing these kind of things rather than kind of like, you know, professionals and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of quite like that. There are some kind of like somewhat kind of low budget special effects on the movie that I kind of quite enjoyed, which is quite fun. And let me tell you this, the movie will end in a way that is very different to how the movie starts off. So tonally, this movie, and this is not necessarily a good thing, but it'd certainly be unexpected. I mean, and we're going to talk about it again. But yeah, where the movie ends off is very different to the kind of like the artistic and dramatic start of the movie. Because when this movie starts, it does feel like it's trying to be somewhat artistic. You know, we have these kind of repetitive shots of Ken making his coffee, cooking his tomato soup, and things like this, and you know, it's kind of showing you the repetitive nature of his world and things, and it's done in quite an artistic fashion. And then you take the end of the movie, and it's pure B-movie hokum. It's like two directors here, it really is. So it's certainly an interesting transition. But let's now transition into what doesn't work. And I'm going to just kind of keep on going where I'm standing here. The movie is so weird in the fact that it changes so much as the film goes on. I don't think I've ever seen a film that kind of starts off somewhat kind of highbrow and ends up just going into the gutter in regards to its kind of like its tone, going into pure B-movie, silly, schlocky, complete with over-the-top performances from some of our supporting characters. Even Michael Shannon here, you know, he's kind of like, I can only assume he's doing a favour for the director or something like that, or he's like knows the producer here, because this is pure B-movie schlock. The last act of this movie is quite funny, and it's so different from, like, say, the first act, where it actually feels somewhat artistic. Okay, so maybe we'll touch upon that again in just a little bit, but I want to kind of talk about some other things here. So I think that the opportunity here to have, as I say, an agoraphobic character having to really try and kind of get over a fear of the outside versus the inside, or something within the inside, is utterly wasted here. It's like a great setup that goes nowhere. You know, we never really see him try to kind of push himself to try and, you know, make himself go outside to kind of get away from it. And, you know, it goes one step further in the fact that when dangerous stuff starts to happen, you know, very kind of overt supernatural stuff, which is purely kind of dangerous, there's no attempt here to call for help. There's no attempt to call for the police, ambulance, neighbour, or anything like that. It ends up kind of just being like, even if he doesn't have to go outside, there's no attempt to get someone else in to help him. You know, no shouting out the window, nothing like that. So, you know, this movie just seems to kind of like, doesn't have a lot of sense in regards to this kind of stuff. This movie was clearly made during lockdown, and there's been lots of films that obviously clearly have been made during lockdown, but very few of them I feel really feel like it. This one, unfortunately, really feels like it's restricted by COVID, because pretty much all of the characters here are just on Zoom monitors. You know, with the exception of Michael Shannon and his ex-wife, they're the only characters that actually share the same room, if that makes sense. Every other character is on Zoom or some type of video kind of conferencing here, and it really feels like, I mean, maybe they should have set it actually during COVID or something like that, made it clear that that was when it was taking place, because it just feels a little bit too, you know, everyone just happens to be on their kind of like Zoom all the time and things. It just feels, it really just feels restricted by that, having that kind of that setting. And if you're pretending it's not happening in kind of COVID, you know, non-COVID times or something, you know, it needs to be worked into the script better here. I feel the threat, the antagonist is a little bit kind of poorly kind of developed and kind of just dropped in, and there's a convenience in how we get to there as well. So there's a convenient way that this kind of a character, let's go, a supported character, happens to have a way into this kind of particular kind of situation, and what he does to kind of like get the ball rolling. Again, it seems pretty convoluted. But the main thing here, as I say, because coming back to it, is the strange tonal shift. Because it starts out like it's going to be a fairly strong dramatic horror movie, and ends up being a real cheap looking kind of like silly, very, very silly, cheesy, over the top B movie. But it kind of has this bizarreness to it because of that. So it does kind of feel like interesting in a way, but just like all over the place. Overall, how would I rate this movie? I honestly can't say it's good, and I have to say I honestly can't say it's even average, because I think it's just poorly put together. But it's an interesting watch. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.